Imagine handing over a list to the police with the exact names of the people who are going to kill you, and still dying at the hands of those very people. This is the true story of Banaz Mahmod, a 20-year-old Muslim woman who experienced the most brutal honor crime ever documented in London. Between December 2005 and January 2006, she approached the British police 5 consecutive times, begging for protection. On her last visit, she was so desperate that she handwrote a list with the names of each person she believed would kill her, including her own father and uncle. The officers looked at that list, heard her terrified pleas, and made a decision that would forever haunt the British judicial system. They sent her back home, straight into the arms of her future murderers. Before continuing with this story that will leave you outraged at the darkest failure of British police, write in the comments where you are watching from. I want to know how far this account is reaching, because cases like this need to echo in every corner of the world. Banaz Mahmod was born into a Kurdish Iraqi family that had emigrated to London in search of a better life, but brought with them medieval honor codes that should never have crossed the borders of the 21st century. From childhood, she knew that her life did not belong to her. It belonged to the family's reputation, ancestral traditions, and the absolute control of the clan's men. At 17, when most British girls were worried about university entrance exams and first jobs, Banaz received a sentence disguised as a blessing. She would be forced to marry Ali Abbas Homar, a man 10 years older whom she barely knew. There was no romantic marriage proposal, no choice, no love. There was only a decision made by the family's men in the name of tradition. But what Banaz discovered in the first days of this arranged marriage was that her situation was much worse than a simple, loveless union. She had been handed over to a violent predator who would see in her not a wife but property to be controlled, abused and broken. And when she finally found the courage to escape this matrimonial prison, she unknowingly sealed her own death sentence. Banaz's forced marriage to Ali Abbas Homar revealed 3 terrifying realities she had never imagined. First, that her husband did not see her as a wife, but as property to be completely dominated. Second, that the physical and psychological abuse was part of a calculated pattern to break her resistance. And third, that the family knew exactly what type of man they had handed her over to, and approved of each aggression as necessary correction. During the first months of marriage, Banaz discovered that Ali had specific control methods that went far beyond physical violence. He controlled her every movement, every conversation, every breath. But there was something even more sinister in his behavior, a direct connection with the men in her family that would only be revealed later, when the assassination plans came to light. Ali's aggressions followed a strange pattern. They always happened after phone calls with Banaz's father and uncle. It was as if he received specific instructions on how to educate the rebellious wife. She began to realize that she wasn't just trapped in an abusive marriage, she was being systematically prepared for something much worse. The last straw came when Ali began threatening her with death if she tried to flee. These weren't empty threats. He described in detail how he would do it, where he would hide the body, and how the family would react with pride for him having defended the honor. It was at this moment that Banaz understood a terrifying truth. She hadn't been handed over to a husband, but to a potential executioner. When she finally found an opportunity and fled in the middle of the night, Banaz thought she had escaped the worst. But what she didn't know was that her escape had activated a family plan much more lethal than any aggression she had suffered up to that point. After months hidden from Ali and the family, Banaz finally breathed when she met Rahmat Suleimani, a young Kurdish man who treated her with the respect and affection she had never experienced. But 3 things about this relationship sealed her fate. First, Rahmat had not been chosen by the family. Second, she had dishonored the arranged marriage by fleeing. And third, in the eyes of the clan's men, she was now considered a lost woman who stained the ancestral name. What seemed like an innocent romance to any external observer was seen by the family as the greatest possible cultural betrayal. Banaz didn't know it, but each encounter with Rahmat was being monitored. Each kiss, each walk, each moment of happiness was being documented as evidence of her infidelity to family honor. The relatives had become spies of her own destruction. In secret meetings that took place at the uncle's house, the family's men discussed not whether Banaz should die, but how and when they would execute the sentence. For them, she had crossed 3 non-negotiable red lines: challenged the arranged marriage, had a relationship with a man without permission, and worst of all, chosen self-love, above family submission. The first threats came by telephone in December 2005. They weren't warnings or attempts at reconciliation. They were direct notifications that she would be killed soon. Her father's voice was cold and calculating. "You chose to dishonor our family. Now you will pay the price that every dishonored woman must pay." But there was something even more terrifying in these calls, the absolute certainty that they weren't bluffs. When Banaz realized that the threats included specific details about where she lived, her schedules, and even descriptions of how she would be tortured before dying, she made the decision that should have saved her life: seek police protection. What she didn't imagine was that this search for help would become the most revolting part of her entire tragedy. Banaz's first visit to the Mitcham police station in December 2005 should have been the moment her life was saved. She arrived visibly shaken with trembling hands, carrying papers with transcripts of the threatening phone calls she had received. But 3 reactions from the police sealed her fate. First, they treated her complaints as typical immigrant family drama. Second, they suggested she was exaggerating out of jealousy of her ex-husband. And third, they advised her to solve the problems at home, talking with the family. What the officers didn't understand, or refused to understand, was that Banaz wasn't reporting common domestic conflicts. She was describing a coordinated assassination plan that involved multiple relatives, including constant surveillance, specific torture threats, and direct promises that she would be killed to wash honor with blood. But each terrifying detail she shared was received with skepticism and institutional indifference. The officers' attitude revealed a dangerous cultural prejudice. For them, Muslim families were naturally dramatic, and women like Banaz were prone to emotional exaggeration. They couldn't, or wouldn't, distinguish between a normal family conflict and a real honor crime threat. This deliberate blindness would cost an innocent young woman's life. During the first interview, Banaz mentioned something that should have made all alarms ring. "They said they're going to torture me for hours before killing me, so I suffer as our honor suffered." Any experienced investigator would recognize this as typical language of premeditated honor crime, but the official response was, "Go home and try to talk with your relatives." When she left the police station that December day, Banaz knew she had been abandoned by the system that should protect her. But she still didn't imagine that she would return 4 more times, each time more desperate, until she would finally do something that would make her death even more revolting. She would write a prophetic list with the exact names of her future murderers. In January 2006, during her second visit to the police station, Banaz did something extraordinary and terrifying. She took a piece of paper and handwrote the names of 5 people who, according to her, would kill her. The list included her father, Mahmod, her uncle, Ari Mahmod, and 3 other close relatives. But 3 aspects of this list made police negligence even more criminal. First, she explained in detail each person's role in the plan. Second, she described how she had discovered the secret meetings where her death was being planned. And third, she begged the officers to protect her before it was too late. The sergeant responsible for the case looked at that list as if it were a teenage fantasy. For him, it was impossible that parents would kill daughters in the 21st century in London. But Banaz explained that she had heard conversations through the walls, that relatives had commented about washing honor with blood, and that her uncle had already said publicly that dishonored women deserve to die. Each detail was specific, verifiable, and absolutely real. The official reaction was devastating. They filed the complaint as family conflict without criminal foundation. There was no investigation of the listed names, no verification of the allegations, not even a conversation with the suspects. Banaz was once again advised to solve the problem within the family, exactly with the people who were planning to murder her. What made this negligence even more revolting was that honor crimes were already known to British police. Similar cases had happened, protocols existed, and warning signs were clear. But cultural prejudices and institutional sexism created a deliberate blindness that would cost an innocent life. Banaz left the police station knowing she was completely alone against a family assassination plan. But she would still try 3 more times to get police protection, each attempt more desperate than the previous, until finally there would be no 6th opportunity to ask for help. Between December 2005 and January 2006, Banaz starred in one of the most desperate survival attempts ever documented in the British judicial system. 5 visits to the police station, 5 pleas for protection, 5 opportunities for police to save an innocent life, but 3 patterns repeated in each attempt. First, officers treated her complaints as female hysteria. Second, they suggested she was inventing threats to get attention. And third, they sent her back home without any protective measures. The third visit was particularly devastating. Banaz arrived with physical evidence, recordings of some threatening phone calls, photos of written messages left at her door, and even the phone number from which the intimidating calls came. She explained that she had changed addresses twice, but the family always discovered where she was living. The responsible officer heard everything and concluded that she was dramatizing to get government assistance. In the 4th attempt, Banaz was visibly terrorized. She told them she had seen her uncle and 2 cousins prowling around her new house, that they had asked neighbors about her schedules, and that a female cousin had told her in secret, "They're going to do to you what they do to all women who dishonor the family." Once again, she was advised to try family dialogue and released without protection. The 5th and final visit happened on January 23, 2006, exactly 1 day before being murdered. Banaz was in total panic, crying uncontrollably, and told the officer on duty, "They're going to kill me tomorrow, please protect me, I know they're going to kill me tomorrow." The official response was that she should stop being dramatic and that families don't kill daughters in the United Kingdom. The next day, January 24, 2006, each person from the prophetic list that Banaz had delivered would participate directly in her kidnapping, torture, and murder. British police not only failed to protect her, they sent her directly into the arms of her murderers 5 consecutive times. On the morning of January 24, 2006, exactly as Banaz had predicted, her father Mahmod and her uncle Ari appeared at her house, accompanied by 3 other men. She recognized all the faces. They were exactly the people from the list she had given to police a month before. But 3 aspects of what happened next made this crime one of the most brutal ever recorded in London. First, it wasn't an impulsive murder, but an execution planned with sadistic details. Second, it lasted exactly 2 hours, each minute calculated to maximize suffering. And third, it was filmed by the murderers themselves, as proof that family honor had been restored. The kidnapping happened at 10 a.m. in broad daylight, in front of neighbors who would later testify to having seen Banaz being dragged to a car while screaming for help. But what awaited her at the location chosen for execution surpassed any nightmare she could have imagined. They didn't just want to kill her, they wanted her to suffer every possible second before dying. During the first 2 hours of captivity, Banaz was systematically tortured with methods that revealed prior planning and knowledge about techniques to prolong agony. The murderers had studied exactly how to cause maximum pain without allowing quick death. She was slowly strangled with a cord, loosened and tightened repeatedly to prolong consciousness and suffering. Forensic evidence later revealed that Banaz fought desperately for her life during each minute of those 2 hours. Her nails were broken from scratching the aggressors so much, her throat showed multiple marks of partial strangulation, and her body presented wounds that indicated systematic torture before the fatal blow. When they finally allowed her to die, they placed the body in a suitcase and drove more than 100 kilometers to Birmingham, where they buried her in a shallow grave. But they made a fatal mistake. One of the people involved in the crime would eventually confess everything, revealing each horrible detail of what happened in those 2 hours that forever shook the British judicial system. Banaz Mahmod, Banaz's older sister, faced a choice that no human being should be forced to make: save her own life by keeping silent, or risk everything to ensure that her sister's murderers faced justice. But 3 factors made her decision even more courageous. First, she knew that denouncing the family meant never being able to return home or see living relatives again. Second, she was certain that she would also be marked for death for betrayal of family honor. And third, she understood that her testimony would be the only chance to prevent other sisters from suffering the same fate as Banaz. Banaz's decision was influenced by a terrifying discovery. She had indirectly participated in planning the murder. The family had used information she had innocently provided about Banaz's habits and addresses to plan the kidnapping. When she realized she had been manipulated into helping murder her own sister, Banaz made the most difficult decision of her life. She would be the key witness against all the men in her family. What made her testimony even more valuable was her intimate knowledge of family planning. Banaz knew about the secret meetings, had heard conversations about torture methods, and knew details that only someone from within the family could provide. But testifying meant publicly admitting that she had been an involuntary accomplice to the most horrible crime of her life. During the months of investigation, Bekal lived under constant police protection, knowing that at any moment she could receive the same death sentence that Banaz had received. She changed her identity, cut contact with the entire Kurdish community, and accepted that she could never have a normal life again, all to ensure that her sister had not died in vain. Her testimony was devastating for the defense. Bekal described in detail how the father and uncle had planned every aspect of the murder, how they had recruited other relatives to participate, and how they had celebrated after the crime as if they had restored family honor. Without her courage, Banaz's murderers probably would have escaped unpunished, and other young women would have suffered similar fates. The trial of Banaz Mahmod's murder began in 2007 and became a milestone in British criminal history for three fundamental reasons. First, it was the first honor crime case in the United Kingdom to result in life imprisonment convictions for all involved. Second, it publicly exposed systematic police negligence, forcing profound changes in investigation protocols. And third, it established legal precedents that saved countless other lives by creating specific tools to combat violence based on family honor. During the trial, devastating evidence revealed not only the brutality of the crime, but also the extent of police failure. Records were presented of Banaz's 5 visits to police stations, recordings of calls where she begged for protection, and the prophetic list with the names of murderers that had been completely ignored. The judge described police negligence as criminal and ordered a complete internal investigation. The sentences were historic. Mahmod, father, received life imprisonment with a minimum of 20 years. Ari Mahmod, uncle, received life imprisonment with a minimum of 23 years. The other 3 accomplices received sentences ranging between 17 and 20 years in prison. For the first time in the United Kingdom, an honor crime was treated with the legal severity it deserved, sending a clear message to other families considering similar acts. The case's impact was immediate and lasting. The Metropolitan Police of London created the Honor Crimes Unit, the country's first specialized specifically in preventing and investigating cultural violence against women. Protocols were developed to identify signs of honor threats, train officers about cultural differences, and establish automatic protective measures for victims at risk. Most importantly, the Banaz case became mandatory educational material in British police academies. Every new officer learns about how cultural negligence can cost lives, how to identify real honor crime threats, and why taking seriously complaints from vulnerable women can mean the difference between life and death. The story of Banaz Mahmod cannot be just another case filed in criminal justice annals. She died because 5 different police officers chose to ignore her pleas, because cultural prejudices were stronger than protective instincts, and because a system that swore to defend her abandoned her in the exact hands of the people she had denounced as her future murderers. But her death was not in vain. The changes her case forced in the British judicial system saved dozens of other women who, like her, lived under threat of family death. The Honor Crimes Unit created after her death has already prevented more than 200 similar murders, and protocols developed in her memory became an international model for combating cultural violence against women. Today, Bekal Mahmod still lives under a new identity, protected by the British state, paying the price of courage for having denounced her own family. She could never again embrace relatives, revisit her childhood, or have a normal life. But her sacrifice ensured that other sisters don't need to write prophetic lists with names of future murderers. Share this video in your WhatsApp groups, Facebook, Instagram, and all your social networks. Banaz's story needs to reach the greatest possible number of people, because only by knowing cases like this can we identify danger signs around us and, who knows, save lives that can still be saved. Write in the comments which part of this story shocked you most, and if you know any similar case that needs to be reported. Subscribe to the channel and activate notifications for more content that exposes the reality behind crimes that change the world. Because stories like Banaz Mahmod's can never be forgotten or repeated. The legacy of Banaz Mahmod extends far beyond her tragic death. Her case became a catalyst for fundamental changes in how honor-based violence is understood and addressed in Western societies. The systematic failures that led to her murder, cultural insensitivity, gender bias in law enforcement, and inadequate training on honor crimes were exposed and addressed through comprehensive reforms. The Honor Crimes Unit established in London became a model replicated across Europe and North America. Training programs developed from Banaz's case now educate law enforcement officers worldwide about recognizing the warning signs of honor-based violence, understanding the cultural contexts that enable such crimes, and implementing effective intervention strategies. Perhaps most significantly, Banaz's story gave voice to countless other women living in fear of family violence, justified by honor. Her courage in repeatedly seeking help, even when systematically failed by authorities, inspired legislative changes that strengthened protective measures for vulnerable women and established clearer protocols for investigating cultural violence. The documentary Banaz: A Love Story, produced by the BBC, brought international attention to her case, sparking conversations about women's rights, cultural practices, and the responsibility of host countries to protect all residents regardless of their cultural background. Educational institutions began incorporating her story into curricula addressing human rights, gender studies, and cross-cultural understanding. Banaz Mahmod's name is now synonymous with the fight against honor-based violence. Her legacy serves as both a tragic reminder of what happens when systems fail the most vulnerable and an inspiration for continued vigilance in protecting women's rights across all cultures and communities. The 5 police officers who failed Banaz faced internal disciplinary actions, and their cases became mandatory study materials for understanding the deadly consequences of cultural bias and inadequate response to domestic violence threats. Their failures, while tragic, became learning opportunities that have undoubtedly saved other lives. Today, when women approach police with concerns about honor-based violence, they encounter officers trained specifically on Banaz's case, protocols designed to prevent similar tragedies and support systems that didn't exist in 2006. While her death was preventable and tragic, the changes it sparked have created a safer world for countless other women facing similar threats. The story of Banaz Mahmod reminds us that individual tragedies, when met with appropriate response and systemic change, can become powerful forces for justice and protection. Her life, though cut short, continues to save lives through the awareness, protocols, and legal frameworks established in her memory.